Hello from Barcelona. It is the 7th of June 2020. We are at the end of phase one here in Barcelona, and I thought it would be interesting to see what has been going on, particularly during the hard quarantine phase. So we're just coming out of, as I say, phase one. So we've been able to go outside and exercise for the past 2 or 3 weeks. Training venues have only just opened last week, but with strict control measures. So I wanted to see, what the effect has been on training during this period. So I created an online survey using Google Forms, asking some questions about changes in training that have been happening. I know a lot of schools have had to close, performance venues, training venues, preparation for end of year performances, evaluations, um, auditions, all been affected. And with the physical distancing, no partner or group training or classes have been possible. So, that's the question. What is the effect? So I collected this data between the 21st of April and the 22nd of May. So for most of Europe, the confinement measures had been implemented. The US lagged a little bit behind. And in terms of the responses, 95 responses within that month. The form is still open, by the way, so you can still fill the form out, and we'll keep collecting data, but this is just data from 1 month. The majority of the respondents were female. The respondents were distributed along this way. So majority were professional. About a quarter were students from a professional circus school, and the remainder were sort of amateur or recreational. The overall age distribution was quite nice, so ranging from teenager all the way to 57 years old, mean age being 31, with a standard deviation of 7 years. So what are the main questions? Has training volume changed since the move indoors? If so, how much? Are we shifting to less frequent, higher intensity training sessions now we're indoors? Are we moving to online tools to assist with training? And has motivation been affected? And these are the primary disciplines from the respondents, roughly 50-50, slightly higher in favor of aerialists. So the first big slide is looking at weekly training volume. Okay, so the blue is typical training volume pre-quarantine, and the red here represent the typical training volume during the quarantine period, okay, during the lockdown. So if we just focus over on this left-hand side to begin with, this question was categorical, so people had to choose between typical training volume between 0 and 3 hours, 4 to 7, 8 to 11, and so forth. So the mean I calculated by taking the midpoint between each of these and weighing them according to the sample to get an idea of what the mean shift is. Okay, so you can definitely see a drop in training volume. I'll just bring your attention to this statement here. So there's an overall drop in average training volume from 17 hours a week, over here, pre-COVID or pre-lockdown, to 9 hours a week. So that's a big drop. And what's quite interesting is there are quite large individual changes. So, it's pretty much as you'd expect. Not many people are doing 0 to 7 hours a week. The vast majority are doing 8 to 25 plus. Conversely, when we go to lockdown, we see that quite a lot of people, almost 20%, are doing either nothing or just 3 hours a week of training. And only a very small amount are doing more than 16 hours a week now. Whereas here you can see a much larger amount. Yeah, so it's quite a big change. If we look at the direction of training volume change, it's pretty dramatic. We can see that just over 75% had a decrease of training volume, and a very small percentage are unchanged, and 0% have actually increased their training volume during the lockdown. Now, what about the duration of, what about the weekly high intensity training frequency before and after? So the interesting thing here, I think, to look at is blue represents typical training and orange represents during the lockdown. So 51% of respondents are now doing 3 sessions or less per week of high intensity training. So 50% of everybody that fill out the form, which is here, here, and here, are now doing only 0 or maximum 3 sessions per week of training. Yeah, as opposed to during 6 weeks before lockdown, most people were doing at least 3 to 8 sessions plus. Okay, so 15% of the respondents were actually doing 8 sessions or more of high intensity training frequency, and only 9% of the respondents are still doing 8 or more sessions of high intensity training per week. Now we're still in the lockdown phase. Okay, so quite a big shift. I think this is the most relevant thing, showing that about 50% of respondents are now have drastically reduced their higher intensity training frequency. Another interesting slide is looking at the move to using online training tools. So before the lockdown, 66% of the respondents did 0 training online, and the orange represents the now. So now, if we see here, 86% of respondents are now doing at least 1 hour of online training a week since moving indoors. So it's proved to be quite an interesting tool, or quite a useful tool, potentially. That makes complete sense, since we haven't got access to our usual training facility or our equipment. Another big slide, and I added in an extra question at the end just to get a little bit of understanding about people's drive and motivation. And it gave the people the opportunity to write, freestyle some of their comments about if and how the motivation had changed. Some people wrote 4 words, some people wrote 2 pages. Pretty interesting, but to just demonstrate it graphically, a huge decrease in motivation. So more than 50% of the sample of the respondents reported a decrease in motivation, sometimes a very dramatic decrease, and about just over 20% of the respondents had basically said that they were up and down, so quite unstable in terms of their motivation. So what has the COVID-19 effect been on training? Some key points: that the majority have had large reduction in changing volume, but some actually have kept their training volume the same, but that's in the minority. There's been a reduction of high intensity training sessions. There's been an increase in the use of online training as a substitute or an alternative modality. And I think there is a big question here around motivation. That's what struck me the most, actually. The fact that people are training less and less intensely during the week makes perfect sense for a circus artist, because you don't have access to your space, your training equipment, your facilities. That makes complete sense. But motivation did concern me, because it's down quite drastically in the majority of people, and very mixed and fluctuating in sort of remaining 20%. Big mixed reaction. I think it comes down to individuality, individual resilience, adaptability, a number of things. Maybe we're going to come back to this at a later date, but for just today I wanted to present the stats. So more than 50% report a reduced motivation, about a quarter of the sample feeling that it fluctuates and is quite unstable, but around 10% actually did report an increase in motivation because they found new ways, novel ways of training, investigating things that they hadn't done before, and actually finding a lot of joy and enjoyment from things that they'd never done before. So that's a quick review of the data. Thank you very much for filling out the form. If you haven't done so, the form is still open, and I will add the link to the text below this YouTube video. Thanks very much. Stay healthy.